Hey, hello and welcome. Welcome to Intentioning This. LinkedIn Live, also streaming on Facebook and Twitter right now. And we're so glad that you are here with us. And these are conversations with the most interesting people to help you reach your highest intentions. I'm Gloria Feldt, and I'm co-founder and president of Take the Lead. Our mission is nothing less than gender parity and leadership in every sector by 2025. We do training, role model programs, thought leadership, mentoring, and all coaching, all those kinds of things. But what I really want to tell you about today is that we know people are kind of tired and burned out. So we want you to join us on Saturday for Take Time for You. And the reason I'm wearing my red hoodie today is that it is from our sponsor, Alala. And when you buy stuff from Alala now, anytime, you can get 20% off with the tag, with what do you call that? The code, Take Lead 20. And also then Take the Lead will get a percentage of that sale as well. So I'm just hawking Alala clothing all over the place. It's the best athleisure clothing anywhere. It got me through the pandemic. Anyway, I am so excited to have Josh Levs with us today. He's been a great champion for dads in the workplace and for men in gender equality in general, which means he's also a great advocate for women and gender equality, right? And as you know, each Intentioning This Live generally relates to one of the chapters or the leadership intentioning tools in my book. And every time I talk about it, every time I make a speech, I get this one question. That question is, yeah, but what about the men? Yeah, but what about the men? And Josh is in that chapter, is one of the answers to what about the men. So we're going to tackle that topic today. Josh is a super leader for workplace equity. He has led the way for men to have equal parental and family leave precisely because he's a man determined to do his fair share. And he has a great family. Got what, 3 kids? 3 kids?
3 kids, yeah.
Yes, 3 kids, a wife. And so, you know, these are the things that we always ask women. And so I'm going to put that into Josh's bio, right? To be serious also, Josh is a great journalist. He's a workplace leader and an expert when it comes to modern dads. He's a communications expert and just kind of an all-around cool guy. So Josh, welcome to Intentioning This Live.
I am so happy to be here. You know, your viewers probably already know this. I'm sure they do, but you are a pioneer, and I always love the chance to talk with you. And we got a lot to talk about. You know, I mean, all these issues. I love how you said that, you know, being an advocate for dads and caregivers is being an advocate for women, because these two things are so hand in hand. And unfortunately, there are still some people who don't know that yet. So it's always good to break that down.
Well, let's start there. I want you to tell people your backstory and how you got to be doing this, and why is this such a personal issue for you?
Sure. So I was a reporter, first for NPR and then for CNN. And at CNN, I was doing a lot of fact checking on air and correcting all these politicians and pundits. And at the same time, I became a dad. My experience becoming a dad it turned out to be very typical in a lot of ways. You know, when my first son was born, I suddenly became very focused on money because I was the sole provider. And a lot of that stuff kicks in for a lot of men also because of the pay gaps. So often men's salaries are the ones that are higher, and therefore there's all the stress, whatever. So I had that. But I also wanted to be this very active, involved dad. And then after the birth of my second child, and I was working too much, I just realized I had to create work-life balance. And at that point, I started covering fatherhood on the air too. I would interview these dads. I would ask them about their lives. And I found that when I had conversations on the air with dads about caregiving that were totally normal, the kind that my friends and I have with each other, the responses we got from viewers were huge. They had never seen anything like it. They didn't know that dads have the same conversations moms do about what are your hopes and dreams for your kid, and what do you struggle with, and what do you feel stressed about. Anyway, then there was this big switch where instead of being the dad covering other dads, I became the dad in the news, because I launched a legal battle for fair parental leave at CNN, which was part of Time Warner at the time. And the short version there is that the policy was ridiculous, but also typical of a lot of places. Under those policies, anyone could get 10 paid weeks after having a kid, except a biological father. Anyone at all, except a biological dad. So I went to benefits in secret and tried to get it changed and said, I will need this time. And long and the short of it, even after my daughter was born prematurely in an emergency, they still said no. So I ended up taking legal action. And ultimately, the company revolutionized its policy, making it better for moms and dads. But that experience, that legal battle, got so much attention and led me to write my book, All In. And I came to understand that treating men as equal caregivers is essential to giving women an equal opportunity in the workplace.
Well, there's been so much conversation lately about, well, not just lately, for the last 2.5 years, about how the pandemic has put so much of a heavier burden on women. And last week I had Reshma Saujani on my live, and she, of course, has written a book about the Marshall Plan for women, in which she's focusing completely on moms. And I asked her that question, like, shouldn't it include dads? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yes. So, during that first year of the pandemic, there was all this reporting about the stress on moms. And I'm a fact checker and I look into dad stuff. So the number one place to go to for stress statistics is the American Psychological Association. I contacted them and I said, what about dads? And they hadn't done it. So they went back and cross-referenced. They ran the numbers for me. And that's when they got back to me and they said, oh, it turns out there's actually no statistical difference between moms and dads, the amount of stress that they're having during the pandemic. But no one was talking about it with dads. Now, because of the effects on women, the sources of stress were different. Women were more likely to lose their jobs. And that has a lot to do with the kinds of jobs that women are more often in. And with the fact that there are still all these tilted rules that push men to stay at work, push women to do the caregiving. And when suddenly there's a kid at home and all this caregiving to do, all these forces are still there to push women to do that. So a lot of the source of stress for women was having to lose their careers and focusing on kids at home and caregiving for loved ones in general. A lot of the sources for men was suddenly being these sole providers when their wives lost their jobs in these traditional families. And so they had stress too. But what it all comes down to is that we are all hurt the same way. And what I explore in my book is that there's three major factors. It's the laws and the policies and the stigmas, the social stigmas. Those three things were built in the 1950s in the Mad Men era. We've still got them today. And until we change them, until we fix them, women will be pushed to stay home. Men will be pushed to stay at work, punished if they take time off, punished in all sorts of ways, losing their jobs, get pay cuts, all this stuff. And we have to fix it together, which is why really when it comes to a Marshall Plan or any kind of solution, putting us all on one team is the only way to achieve that.
So how do we do that? I mean, let's talk practicalities here. The workplace, you know it inside out. You've been outside and inside, and you've been in the position of a father who's trying to do his fair share, and you're looking at the data. So let's get really concrete here. And I mean, I know there are systems changes that can be made, but is it all systems, or, I mean, what do we do?
So number one, laws, policies, stigmas in that order. Number one is laws. We need paid family leave in America.
Well, that's certainly true.
Yeah, I know you're a big fan of that. We're working on it. It should be a national plan. It's so obvious. We are the only nation basically in the world that does not make sure that when a baby is born, it can have food on the table and a parent at home for at least a block of weeks. It's insane that we don't have that. Paid family leave is not a requirement on businesses to pay salaries when someone's off. It's an insurance system. I explained it on my website. You can learn more about it. It's proven to work. It exists in several states now. Profits are up. It keeps people in the workforce, and it creates more gender equality because both women and men get paid time off to be with their families through that insurance system. So number one is laws. We need that. And then number two is policies. And this is where I do a lot of my work with businesses. We need to create policies that ensure that no one faces what I did. There should never be a policy that says, well, really women are the caregivers, not you. There should never be any reason that a man has to struggle to be an equal caregiver. So we need to make sure, and the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, sent out guidance after my legal case, specifically saying that it's important that you make sure that your policies clearly separate physical recovery leave after a birth for a woman and caregiving leave. You have to have separate caregiving leave, and that has to be gender neutral. So you have to make sure your policies are there. And then the third thing is culture. And that's where the real meat of the work is, because you can have all the right policies, But if there are still stigmas against men being caregivers, still stigmas against women staying at work because people think they should be home, we will never fix that. So once you get those laws and policies in place, you need to do the cultural work on a societal level and an organizational level to make sure that everyone feels equally comfortable taking time, getting flexible schedules, and opening up openly in a really emotional way about the experience of being caregivers at home.
Now, when you are working with a company on that cultural piece, I'm really curious about specifically what are some of the kinds of things that you do, because at Take the Lead, we have a culture of inclusion program. And of course, I work more with women than with mixed groups,
Sure.
but more and more the groups are mixed. And more, the good news is that men want to have some of these same, the same information, the same kind of leadership skills. People understand that leading like a woman is kind of a good thing because companies with more women in their upper leadership actually are more profitable. So there's a lot more, so there's a lot more of that. But one of my favorite sayings is, it's hard to change a culture while you're living in it.
Yes.
And so I am really curious about specifically, how do you help an organization change its culture?
Yep. So there's two major ways. One is when I'm talking to people at the top, I start off with numbers and data and show why it's profitable to change that culture. So first is making sure that they understand that. I do a lot of work and research with this brand, Dove Men Plus Care. We have a partnership and we do surveys, and consistently we find that the overwhelming majority of men and women say that they want men to feel equally comfortable being caregivers, and that men are up against these societal pressures inside their organizations. And I show businesses that men are leaving their jobs too because they want to work for employers who will support them as fathers and as caregivers for anyone. In fact, there's an Ernst & Young study that found that men are even more likely than women in America to switch jobs or careers or take pay cuts to have more time with their families.
Really?
Women are more likely to drop out of the workforce, but among those who stay in the workforce, men are more likely to be the ones to do all those changes. The difference is we don't talk about it. So we leave our job, go to a new job that's more conducive to fatherhood, to caregiving, but we don't tell the previous employer that that's why we left. So it's only when the surveys come along that we learn this. So I tell the people at the top, you will attract and retain employees, male and female, if you fix that culture. But the cultural work has to happen a lot of it at the managerial level and at the base level of employees. So what I do is I often start off with only men, because what happens is men are uncomfortable talking about this in front of women because they think that if they talk about their struggles with work-life balance, with work-life integration, with caregiving, that a woman will say to them, oh, come on, you're a man in a patriarchy. You have no problems. Who are you to talk? And that's not what happens. I tell people women are so supportive of these conversations. Don't be afraid. But they are. So we usually start off with a group of just men, kind of the opposite of what you had. And then little by little, on stage 2 in the workshop, we have a few women in there and they speak at the end and say how great it is to hear these guys discuss it. By 3, more women. And by stage 4, we've got groups of men and women talking about all these things. And we discuss the steps they can take together. And that helps change the cultural DNA of an organization because they spread the word. More women and men become parts of these groups internally to change the policies and support each other as caregivers. So it takes that kind of cultural work, and it takes managerial training so that managers become conscious and aware that they need to expect that all of their employees, whether male or female, will engage equally in caregiving, and they need to operate based on the assumption that that's how things will be. And when they do, you find real concrete change.
Well, we've seen a lot of data that says there's a daddy benefit and a mommy penalty, right? For people who have children, and that men who have children are more likely to be assumed by their superiors to be fine, upstanding people who are, taking care of they're earning the money for their family, and they must be really good people because they have children. Women who have children are assumed not to be paying as much attention to their work. They're assumed that they may just bail out at mid-career, which of course they often do, but it's not because of children. We know that. I mean, the data shows clearly that it's not because of having children. It's because the culture does not support them.
That's right.
And so there are lots of, and I would say actually one of my theories right now is that the biggest competition for women in the workplace is not other companies. It's women starting their own businesses because they want to have that kind of control. They want to be able to create their own cultures. And if big businesses want to bring women back in after having made so much investment in having more women in the workforce, they're going to have to change many of their policies. It's just, I think they're going to be forced into it. Are you still seeing that daddy benefit and mommy penalty that statistics have long said are there?
Yeah. So let's break this down. So the idea of the daddy bonus, that is there, but only if you don't say that you need paternity leave or take time for a flexible schedule. As soon as you say any of those things, suddenly you get the opposite. Suddenly the bonus turns into a penalty. And that idea of a bonus comes from this old way of thinking. Oh, now that you have children to feed, you're going to want to work extra hard. You're going to want to put in all this overtime. Because the man makes the money. And the opposite assumption about women. Oh, you'll want to do more caregiving. Oh, you're the more emotional one. Oh, you're the one who will give the love and support. You'll want to do less at work. So as a result of these backward expectations, people treat their employees that way. So that benefit is limited to those dads, which these days is a small sliver of dads. But then what happens is those dads, the handful that don't commit to caregiving, which is really unusual, but it still happens. There's always some. They are the ones who impress the bosses because the bosses think that way. They raise those guys up the ranks. Those guys become the new bosses, and then they do that to the people underneath them, and it becomes this vicious cycle. So breaking that cycle is crucial. We have to make sure that we do, and that's how you do it through the policy and cultural changes. And what you're saying about creating new businesses is really significant. This is something I found, I explored in my book. I met women everywhere who have done the same thing, and men are starting to do it too. That in order to have the flexibility they seek, they are leaving. And so what is happening is that these businesses are starting to find that they can't operate based just on a handful of people who match their ideal of what a good worker is. And one thing I have them do is set aside this whole idea of how many hours was someone sitting at their desk? How often do you see them in the office? That kind of thing. And instead, go back and look across a month or a quarter or a year, how much did each person get done? What did they achieve for you during that time metric? And you find it's almost never the same people. The people you see the most are almost never the most productive. And when you set aside these ideas of what a worker should look like, instead, you focus on work as a thing that is achieved. What did they do? Suddenly you find that a lot of people with caregiving in their lives are actually your most productive employees, your most successful employees. So helping them look concretely at achievements and data can sometimes be very eye-opening and get them to change those expectations.
You just made me think of an anecdote, which I am going to share, of a woman who worked for me at Planned Parenthood in Arizona, and she was an only child and had planned on having only one child. And she had the one child, and then about 4 months later, she came into my office and her face was just ashen. And she said, "I'm pregnant again with twins." And she just assumed it was going to be the end of her career. And that, she just couldn't even imagine. Fast forward a couple of years. Number one, of course, she became one of the most loyal people ever, because I'm like, "Oh, good, you're having twins. How nice. Let's kind of go through this together."
Yeah.
But more importantly, I remember her saying to me how much more efficient she became. And, she never slacked off on the work that had to be done. She just became incredibly more efficient about doing all of it.
We're good multitaskers.
Yes. That's, when you learn to do everything with the baby on your hip, you just do.
Well, look at the career you built. You had children very young.
Yes.
And you built a huge career and took over this massively famous organization. And I'm sure you learned lessons from being a young mom about how to get so incredibly much done And do it quickly and still do a bang up job, still do it really well. It's not, and this is why I tell bosses, look at what got done, because it's not just like, okay, fine, they can check a box, something is done. What did it achieve for the organization?
Right.
Did they do such a good job that they brought this many new people in? They brought in new customers. They created a new product or service. Look at the actual achievements of these folks. It is not true that having caregiving responsibilities for anyone, even not just a kid, an elderly parent, a sick spouse, it's simply not true that having caregiving responsibilities makes you a less productive or successful employee. And one way that people learn that is through parenthood.
You better believe it. Nothing has ever taught me more, I'll tell you that. So I want to go back to a question about the pandemic, because my theory is that we will never have another moment in our lifetimes when we can make so much change so quickly. Because massive disruptions like a pandemic force organizations, which are kind of like amoebas, they have to change their shape to survive.
That's a great line.
And so I'm really trying to think through, how do we use this moment? Because there are so many disruptions going on. There's so many new things that now every company knows you can work from anywhere at any time and get the job done.
Right.
And they know that you can have more flexibility than they ever thought you could have. So how do you see us being able to use this moment?
Yeah, so this is a huge opportunity. Every disruption is a big opportunity. This is certainly the biggest disruption of our lives. I had a very big concern when this first happened, and I'll explain why. I have been pushing organizations to allow work from home for a very, very long time. We live in an era of Google in which you can say, is the sky actually green, and find someone who says yes. So if you want to believe, does work from home reduce productivity? You can find someone claiming it. But as a fact checker, someone who looks at the real data, who doesn't just like take headlines, but actually I dig into the methodologies and the raw figures. It is clear that working from home makes people more productive. It just does in almost all jobs that involve sitting at a computer. So that opportunity is something I've pushed for a long time. My concern was, with all these people suddenly working from home, that businesses would associate working from home with the kind of working from home that we had to engage in 2020 and 2021. Then we had our kids at home too, and we had all these other problems going on. So I was concerned that the work from home that was happening would not be as wonderfully productive as it could be. And then bosses might be like, oh, work from home isn't that great. But then what happened was the numbers came in, productivity was up. There were all these reasons to continue allowing and supporting people to work from home, and it gets people off the streets, and it has a positive environmental impact. There's all these reasons. And it did become an opportunity. So now what I've been working on is helping cement it into the thinking and the plans for organizations so that remote work is always an option in as many industries as possible. And to help people see the real data that, even during the pandemic, it still went up. And now that our kids are more often off at school, we can be even more productive at home, those of us who are parents. So taking advantage of that is really important. One thing though that we have still not gotten, that I really want us to get, is the paid family leave. There's tremendous, we're pushing at GovMed Plus Care. We have all these efforts that we're engaged in to push for paid paternity leave, which is part of paid family leave. We still need that. And unfortunately, because of the makeup of the Congress, it's probably not getting through right now. But I want us to keep pushing hard, because this disruption should show people how incredibly important it is to have an insurance system in place, just like there is for unemployment, so that if you need this caregiving time, you are paid out of that fund that you paid into. It makes everything better. And that is, to me, still a steep hill to climb. And this time of disruption that we're still in presents an opportunity for people to say, you know what, it's finally time for us to fix that.
Oh, I am so with you on that, and really most eager to figure out how we can join together with all of the people who feel that way. Because having spent a lot of time in the political realm, that's what it takes. You can't change those things without joining together. And I'm hoping that there are enough. I'm intentioning that there are enough companies now that get it. And they're the ones who can probably push that needle and push the dial over.
Well, I'll just mention, since we said politics, we have multiple surveys. The overwhelming majority of Republicans, Democrats, Independents, people who identify as conservative support a paid family leave insurance system, and it's good for business. So there's no good reason to be against it, but Congress is a mess and not really responsive to what the overwhelming majority of Americans want, unfortunately.
There's that.
So yeah, we're not getting that now, but we are getting it in the states, and we can keep pushing and hopefully get it federally.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask you one more kind of tough question. I don't know if it may not be tough for you.
Hey,
but
no, hit me up.
I'm thinking about the Tucker Carlsons of the world, who are trying to say that all of these changes that we're making are going to make, it's going to be the end of men, right? The end.
Did you see that in the same video?
Oh my gosh. Anyway, so what's your answer to that?
It makes absolutely no sense. There's nothing about this that's ending men. Men are not in danger. Men, look, men are almost half the people. Women are almost half the people. There's a small percentage of people who don't identify as either. So what you're looking at is not the end of men in any way. But there are aspects to what is expected of men and women in different generations, in different eras, that change over time. And you can go way back and see, I saw this old Charlton Heston movie not long ago, Ben-Hur, and this is, I don't know what decade it was from, but he was sobbing at the beginning of the movie. These things that in certain generations, some people think like men never do that. Well, they used to, and they still do. So no, men are not in danger. We are not disappearing. And you become a stronger human being when you can talk openly about emotions, when you can have a caring relationship. This is more the work we do too, Well, I'm with everyone, with Men Plus Care, with my book. We do all this work in helping everyone understand that men are caring beings too. And as long as we associate men with these other things that are not about caring and not about caregiving, we are going to continue the laws and policies and stigmas that prevent men from being equal caregivers. We have to normalize it. We have to normalize the essential humanity of all people, no matter what gender. And declaring that there's some sort of end of men is simply not factual. And as you know, I'm into facts.
Yes, I've heard you say that many times. I want to say that again, though. I want to hear you say that, what you just said about normalizing. What did you say?
So we have to normalize men as equal caregivers. It shouldn't be, on the one hand, it shouldn't be trashed, like men being caring and emotional. That should never be trashed. It also should not be celebrated as a moment of heroism when we're caring for our kids. It should just be completely normal, because human beings are caring beings, and it's why we care for each other. So we need to normalize men as equally caring people.
Love that. Love that. That is so wonderful. So I have one final question that I always ask everyone.
Okay.
And it's particularly interesting for me to ask it of you as a man. My final question for you is, what is your biggest leadership lesson for women?
So men need women to start conversations about caring, about work-life balance, about work-life integration. Men won't bring that up, but we are also secretly struggling with it. In fact, they have data that shows that men have as much work-life conflict as women do, but we're less likely to discuss it. And women leaders are in a very strong position to help, to be the ones to turn to men. And even something as simple, and I talked about this in my TED Talk, your TEDx talk. You say something like, I'm wrestling with how to handle this with my mom that I'm caring for, and also getting this work done. How do you handle it? Most guys have told me that if a woman asked them that, they'd be shocked, because they didn't know that they're allowed to weigh in. It is an act of leadership and an act of allyship. Men need to be allies for women, and women can be allies for men too. It's leadership and allyship to turn to a man and invite him into that conversation and discover what his perspective is.
Beautiful. So how can people find you? Because I know they're going to want to know more about you and the work that you do. And so how can they reach you?
Yeah, joshlevs.com, JOSHLEVS.com. And I'm on LinkedIn, which is always a great place to find me, connect with me, tell me where you are, send me a connection request. I would love to see you there. And, you'll find me on Twitter too.
Fantastic. I hope you all will follow Josh. And the only thing I'm disappointed about, Josh, is you asked a question before we started about which Gloria song I wanted you to sing.
Yes.
And you haven't sung any of them yet.
I'm going to pick one and I'm going to go post it on Twitter right after this.
Okay, very good. Well, I can't thank you enough for spending your time with us. And this is going to just a great conversation. I really hope people will follow you and learn from you as I have over the years of knowing you. And all know that you can help take the lead, reach intersectional gender parity by leadership in 2025 by telling everybody you know about taketheleadwomen.com. You following us on social media at TakeLeadWomen on Instagram and Twitter, and Take the Lead Women on Facebook. And oh my God, this is so hard to remember. Facebook and LinkedIn. I wish we hadn't picked a name that was so long, but we did. So there we go. And do remember to join us. Excuse me just a minute.
Do remember to join us. Absolutely.
Do remember to join us. Yes. Do remember to join us on Saturday, April 23rd. That's coming right up. If you're watching this in real time or soon thereafter, when we will have a fabulous Take Time for You program that is free. And we decided we needed to do something to help all of the people who are saying they're tired and burnt out and stressed. Well, we're going to have breath work. We'll have exercise, movement. We have some fabulous women's health information for you. And I'll be teaching a little segment on how to tell your story and how to use storytelling for leadership. So we're really excited about it. And you can just go to our website, taketheleadwomen.com, and you can find how to sign up for it. So hope you will be with us. And Josh, again, thank you so very, very much. Look forward to continuing this conversation with you as always. For everyone, I'll see you next week, April 28th, when my guest will be Rupa Dash. Rupa is one of the intentional women in my book, Intentioning, because she has not just a big picture, not just a big goal, but like a huge goal of assorted moonshots for how we are going to change the world together with her World Woman Foundation. So see you next week. Thank you again, Josh Levs. Till then, everybody, keep intentioning.